The Chronicles of Uzaya, a novel by Robert Ray. This audiobook is narrated by Silas Grim, an AI voice built from scratch. No human voice was used in the recording of this audio. Chapter 13. The Veilguard. The Crucible Vault Dampening Cell. An ancient vessel hauled up centuries ago from the ruins directly beneath the vault. Egg-shaped, 8 feet tall, black stone dimpled like hammered bronze, threaded with platinum where stress fractures had been sealed. The chamber predated the sundering. Crucible mages had never replicated it. They had only learned how to use it. Copper bands reinforced the elliptical shell at regular intervals, tuned to amplify the stone's suppressive resonance. The interior was hollow, barely wide enough for a man, and a narrow examination table. It sat at the center of a bare chamber, where a single brazier provided heat and light. Inside, magic died. Thylin placed the pendant on the table, then stepped back outside the cell. Jesper Hadley, a junior arcanist eager to prove himself, went inside. He was the first to volunteer. Thylin had warned him to be careful, but warnings meant little to the young and ambitious. "It's just a trinket," he'd said. "I've handled enchanted jewelry before." Jesper reached out, took the pendant in his hand, fingers tracing the designs in the metal. Several seconds passed. Nothing. Then his hand recoiled. Not from heat, but contact. Something on the other side, pressing back through the metal. His breath hitched, pupils dilated. "What?" The word died in his throat. The pendant lay still, unchanged. Jesper staggered back, face drained of color. He braced himself on the examination table, chest heaving, breath fast and shallow. Thylin stepped forward. "What did you feel?" He didn't answer immediately, just stared at the pendant like it might move. His hands trembled. "Junior Arcanist Hadley," Thylin said sternly. "Report." "It exists." His voice was barely audible. "Something impossible." He swallowed hard. Thylin's eyes narrowed. She pulled a small journal from her robes, quill poised, but her attention stayed on Jesper. "Describe it. What did you experience?" "Contact," the word scraped out. "Like something on the other side." Jesper met her gaze, hands quivering. "Saw me." She wrote quickly, hand moving across the page without looking down. "Hostile?" "Yes." "No, He trailed off, staring at nothing. Thylin studied him, trembling hands, face sickly, nearly white. She closed her journal. "Go back to your quarters," she said. "I'll examine it myself." He nodded and stumbled out without saying anything. Thylin began preparing immediately. She brought every precaution: anti-scrying wards, psychic dampeners, resonance nullifiers. She laid them in concentric circles around the table, checking everything twice. The preparation took hours. The pendant was extraordinary. Veilguard make, certainly thousands of years old, transmitting along ley line nodes she couldn't fully map. The craftsmanship alone, the harmonics encoded into the metal structure, would challenge half of the Crucible's established doctrine on the construction of artifacts. Then she picked it up. As she tried to trace the transmission, to follow where it led, something turned its attention toward her and looked back. A quiet breath escaped her. The wards did nothing. She set the pendant down immediately. "That's enough," she said to the empty room. Jesper was right. This should never have been brought inside. She locked the pendant away and carried it to her office. That night, Jesper couldn't sleep. He lay in his quarters, curled on the floor against the wall. The bed was too soft, too open. Every shadow held that presence, lurking just behind. Infinite, unblinking, judging. He had been weighed and found wanting, without explanation or appeal. There was no anger in the verdict, no malice, only certainty. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He'd tried eating but vomited it up. Tried drinking water, but it felt like sandpaper going down. The presence had not left him. It remained at the edge of his awareness, the way a mountain is recognized. Unmoving, undeniable, eternal. By dawn, he was whispering to himself. Prayers, numbers, anything to keep his thoughts from slipping. When his supervisor found him mid-morning, Jesper was still sitting on the floor, rocking slowly, mumbling about eyes and spirals and something deep beneath the world. Thylin signed the reassignment herself. They carried him to the asylum. Jesper never returned. It was just past noon when Uzaya climbed the crucible steps. Thylin's office sat on the third floor, north wing. Her door slightly ajar. He knocked once. "Come in." Uzaya stepped inside. The office was small, organized. Books lined 3 walls, stacked by subject rather than size. A single window overlooked the inner courtyard, where the ley line well in the center pulsed with blue and purple light. 10 feet across, stone-rimmed, energies rising like luminescent mist. Mages gathered around it, practicing cantrips that flared brighter near the well's presence. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit." He sat. She studied him for a long moment. "I examined your pendant. So did Jesper Hadley, one of our junior arcanists." "And?" "Jesper is in the asylum. Whatever he experienced destroyed his mind." She took a deep breath and leaned back in her chair. "It's Veilguard made, very old, and as you're aware, still active, still transmitting. When I attempted analysis, the connection proved bilateral." She paused, choosing words carefully. "This isn't a cursed object. It's not spiral tainted. It belongs to a magic system the Crucible has no category for." Uzaya said nothing. Thylin's gaze did not waver. "You've been wearing it a long time," she said. "Does it disturb you?" "Not anymore." "Why not?" He answered without hesitation. "Because it's meant for me." Silence pooled between them. Thylin leaned back slowly. "I'm not going to pretend I understand the relic or why it responds to you. But I recognize capability when I see it, especially the kind that survives what others have not." She opened a desk drawer and drew out a folded document. "I have a proposition." Thylin folded her hands on the edge of the table and leaned back. "There are sealed chambers beneath the Crucible. One of them is an old research laboratory. We've sent several expeditions." Her fingers tightened together for a moment, then relaxed. "Some didn't come back. The ones who did weren't the same." "Whose laboratory?" "Archmage Temrath. 75 years ago, the Crucible attempted to expand into the sublevels, to tap into the ley line power beneath the foundations. Temrath led the effort." She paused. "Something went wrong. He was found dead in his chamber. The recovery team refused to return. His body's still there." "And the expeditions?" "All within the last 5 years. None were successful." She slid the document across the desk. "Go to Temrath's chamber. Bring back whatever is salvageable. She let a moment pass. Succeed, and I'll grant you full crucible clearance. Archives, research stacks, apothecary stores, facilities for preparation and controlled testing. Her fingers drummed once on the desk. Until then, access is provisional. Supervised research, limited hours, apothecary use under oversight. She slid a second document across the desk. Your access will be revoked immediately if you abandon the mission, or if the pendant shows corruption. Her gaze held his. Prove you're as capable as I think you are, and formal membership follows. Uzaya read the terms. They were clear. Fair enough. He set the document down. Agreed. Thylin retrieved the pendant from the warded case and set it on the desk. Uzaya fastened the leather cord around his neck. His shoulders eased as the familiar warmth spread through his chest. Thylin watched. It doesn't bother you at all? No. She extended her hand. Then we have an agreement. After Uzaya left, Thylin locked her office door. She crossed to her cabinet and withdrew a weathered text, spine cracked, pages stained with smoke from fires it had survived. Chronicles of the Sundering, Volume 1. She sat at her desk, opened the book carefully, and began to read. The opening passage described the age of the Ancient One, nearly 5,000 years past, an entity that ruled both surface and deep, that appeared as a tentacled eye, large enough to eclipse the sun. She kept reading. The world was its dominion. In those days, the sky dimmed to twilight not by storm, but by decree. The Drow, Jurau, the text called them, served as architects, masters of sonic magic. They erected black pyramids at ley line junctions, structures so massive their foundations still remain. Hours passed. Thylin cross-referenced fragments scattered across 3 texts. One mentioned regulators. Another referred to keepers of the frequency. A third described the pendants, black metal, geometric etching, rhombus form. The Crucible's own archives dismissed most of it as legend. Mythology before the Sundering, Drow propaganda. But the stories aligned. Veilguard, keepers of balance between the ley line and the spiral. At the height of the Ancient One's dominion, an order of 9 Veilguard walked the world together. After the Sundering, references spoke only of solitary figures. The Veilguard were exceedingly rare. Each bore a pendant, forged from metal that fell from the sky, marked with a half-closed eye. The pendant did not seek the virtuous. It sought alignment, resonance with the frequencies that built the world. Thylin set down her quill. Most scholars would call this speculation, fringe theory, career-ending conjecture. But Jesper was in the asylum, and Uzaya wore the relic without consequence. Another fragment, this one older, spoke of bloodlines, not something that could be learned, only inherited, to perceive what others could not, to feel the frequencies that ran through the ley lines, through stone, through everything. The pendant recognized something in the blood. Thylin thought of Uzaya's calm when he wore it. Some part of that bloodline lived in him. The fragments described endurance beyond normal limits. Those with the Veilguard lineage could hear the songs of the Ancient One in all things, in the frequencies that sustained the world. She turned pages faster now. When the Great War began, over 3,000 years ago, the tribes on the surface rose to oppose the Ancient One's dominion. The Jurau were tasked with suppressing the rebellion. They turned to their most advanced discipline, sound weaving, refined into weapons of devastation and control. To extend its reach, they began incorporating corrupted spiral frequencies into their sonic arts. At first, it was effective. Rebellions collapsed under sustained assault. But the spiral does not distinguish between intent and outcome. It draws all things into its nature. Prolonged exposure altered the Jurao themselves. Within a generation, corruption took hold. Paranoia replaced discipline. Precision decayed into excess. Their sound weaving lost coherence, devolving into dangerous, unstable magic. Worse, the spiral energies embedded into their discipline propagated independently. Cysts formed where harmonic stress accumulated. From them emerged warped growths, deadly breaches, and monstrous entities no longer bound to Jurao control. The power meant to enforce order had begun to dismantle it. Then came the Storm Kings, weather priests. From the far northern wastes, wielding lightning as blade and hammer, they had watched the Drow corruption spread for generations, watched the spiral cysts multiply, watched the Ancient One do nothing as they suffered. They chose war. The Storm Kings shattered the Black Pyramids and toppled the twilight obelisks that had kept the world in permanent dusk. Once again, the sun's light warmed the earth. The Jurao fled underground, retreating back to Thalvorith, their realm deep beneath the earth. The Veilguard scattered, their pendants lost or buried with the bonded. Thylin set the book down briefly, staring into space. The Ancient One watched its own order collapse and did nothing. After a moment, she picked it up again and flipped forward. The Sundering did more than shatter empires. It reordered the world's population, breaking the elder races and leaving humanity to fill the spaces they left behind. The elves, who had served as the Ancient One's bureaucrats and record keepers, were despised and hunted. Some fled to hidden enclaves in the deep forests. Most died in the purges that followed. Humans had long memories, and the elves had been the judges and magistrates who enforced Drow law for millennia. During the Sundering, they were scapegoated and folded into the crimes of the Drow themselves. Within 2 centuries, seeing a full-blooded elf became rare. Half-elves, born of desperate alliances amid the collapse, were all that remained in most cities. The dwarves withdrew to their mountain holds. But the Storm King's lightning did not discriminate between Drow pyramids and dwarven fortifications. Seismic shocks split stone that had endured for ages. Entire holds collapsed. Thousands were buried alive. They never forgave it. Wherever Storm Kings were encountered afterward, conflict followed. Dwarven survivors withdrew deeper than ever before, sealing roots, abandoning surface trade, vanishing from human reach. By the time Faragoth consolidated power, the amphitheaters, transit chambers, and deep vaults the dwarves had built had been repurposed, maintained by hands that no longer understood the systems beneath them. The gnomes vanished almost entirely. They had always been rare, but their importance far outweighed their numbers. Their keen understanding of the harmonic arts was integral to leyline stability. Most of the tools and infrastructure they built to contain it were not understood, and were quickly dismantled as symbols of Drow tyranny. Those few who survived hid their knowledge and vanished into obscurity. Within a single generation, their secrets were lost, their inventions no longer understood. Humans inherited a much different world, one built on the bones of peoples they did not honor. By the time the Faragoth Empire fractured into the kingdoms that exist today, the shift was complete. Tharn Eskar was ruled by humans. Half-elves lingered in port cities. A lone dwarf might still be seen on the trade roads. A drow might survive, but only by hiding what they were. These were the remnants, not considered equals, echoes of a world that once was. She turned the page. 2,000 years ago, surface mages discovered an ancient ruin built above a powerful ley line node. There they built the Crucible Vault, sitting atop the old foundations and anchoring it to the convergence of energies there. A settlement formed around it. Those who held power were drawn to the ley line's focus. It was in this way that Eldenport rose. Thus the Storm Kings founded the Faragothic Empire, bringing the rule of man to all of Tharn-Eskar. Then, near the back, a single paragraph she had marked with a faded ribbon. The pendant does not choose the time. It wakes only when balance has already failed, when the spiral has already grown beyond containment. A Veilguard does not manifest as a warning, but as a last resort. Thylin read it twice, then closed the book. Minutes passed. She sat in silence, hands resting on the worn cover. She didn't need proof. The ley lines were weakening. The spiral was not, and the pendant had woken. Her throat tightened. She locked the volume away. The world is ending, and no one else has even begun to see it. Chapter 14. The Black Blade. Uzaya began his preparations. Thylin had given him the expedition maps, 3 separate sheets, each drawn by different hands. The first was neat, methodical, areas labeled in careful script, but ended abruptly halfway through the second level. The second map showed the same passages, but the proportions couldn't be right. Corridors stretched too long, chambers drawn too large, the ink smudged in places. A note along one margin. Growth on east wall. Yeri ill, can't go on. The third was barely legible, like it had gotten wet. Lines crossed and recrossed themselves, spirals drawn in the corners. Breathing in the walls, breathing in the walls. It was signed at the bottom in an unsteady hand. Tovan. He remembered Thylin's words. 3 men dead, 2 returned, broken. He spent 2 days arming himself with what the Crucible could offer before his descent. The mornings were spent in the Crucible's practice yard, reacquainting himself with balance and blade. Students sparred in predictable patterns, but he learned quickly watching the masters. Their technique, their choices. Afternoons belonged to the archives. The iron screen to the restricted stacks stood closed. He opened it. Inside, he found a volume titled Catalogus Monstrorum, Apex Predators of Tharn-Eskar. He found an entry on Gorgons. Territorial, nocturnal, scattered across the realm. Sightings recorded at temple ruins north of Holford, coastal caves near Brinehand Cove, and Liesenhold. A marginal note faded. Concord records cite the transformation of scholar Ilvare, 175 years past. Ritual mishap, bound by surviving priests. Current status, unknown. Uzaya read the passage again. Liesenhold, scholar Ilvare, bound by surviving priests. The figure he had watched did not wander the ruins. It haunted them. And she had a name. He returned the book to its shelf. On the second day, Uzaya visited the alchemy labs. Benches lined the walls, cluttered with crucibles set in sand trays and racks of cooling glass. Corlin, the head alchemist, worked among them in a stained leather apron, sleeves rolled, moving with the steady economy of someone who had ruined enough batches to stop rushing. Uzaya moved slowly through the lab, pausing at the shelves, checking labels without touching anything. Corlin watched him with suspicion until Uzaya corrected a mislabeled jar of wolfsbane by scent alone. "That's not fever moss," Uzaya said. "It'll kill someone." Corlin tipped the jar, watching the material cling to the glass instead of slumping. He set it down and met Uzaya's eyes. "How did you know?" "Grew up in the woods. You learn what poisons you." By afternoon, Corlin trusted him with components volatile enough to melt skin and spoke to him like someone who had already earned his place. "Most think alchemy is beneath them," Corlin muttered while pouring a pale green tonic. "You actually know the plants." Later, Uzaya completed a full antitoxin batch without direction. Corlin watched the final stages, then nodded once. The tonic cooled in its glass vial. Corlin corked it himself. By sunset, Uzaya was back in his room at Hearth End Lodge. He reviewed the expedition notes one last time. Tomorrow, he would descend. In the morning, Thylin met him at the northwest tower entrance. The area was restricted, even to faculty. "Sub-level access was sealed some 70 years ago," she said, unlocking the outer gate. Metal slid aside with a muted groan, exposing a second barrier beneath. She worked through the locks, one by one. Each door opened, exposed another. "The wards reset at dawn," she said, placing her hand on a glowing sigil. It flared silver and died. "I can keep it open until then. Once it reconfigures, no one will be able to open it." The last door ground open, and Uzaya descended the stone stairs into the dark. As the light faded, he drew out his glowstone. The stairs ended in a rough-hewn corridor with broken tile floors. The stone walls were crumbling, uneven, braced in places. He could taste the dust in the air. Dry, stale. Doorways opened on either side. Storage chambers, barracks, offices. They repeated as he went, broken by stretches of blank wall and the occasional side passage that slipped out of sight before turning away. One large chamber held walls of shelves sagging under ledgers and remnants of books rotted past handling. Another contained alchemical equipment, glass vials in wooden racks, some clouded, others filmed with residue. He gathered the few that still seemed viable and put them in his pack. He passed by chambers that must have been living quarters once, long abandoned, and followed the main corridor until it ended at another staircase. The glowstone's light shifted as he went down. The walls of the stairwell changed beneath his hand, blockwork giving way to black, seamless surfaces that curved inward as the stairs continued down. Veilguard construction. He recognized it instantly. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a broad hall. Sculpted panels lined the walls, familiar patterns engraved in stone, symbols he recognized from his pendant. Farther along, an alcove opened in the curved wall. Set against the outline of a pyramid was a single eye, carved in disturbing detail, its gargantuan tentacles spiraling outward from the edges. Worshippers clustered below, hands raised in fear or worship. Beyond that, a chamber held the remains of what was clearly an expedition camp. Rotted bedrolls, empty lanterns. A map was scratched into the plaster wall. A name scrawled beside it. Tovan. Below it, in increasingly desperate script. So close. So close. So close. Uzaya looked back the way he had come. The stairs were not that far, but the map showed their attempts. They had marked every passage, every turn. Lines circling, doubling back, leading again to the same wrong places. Tovan had been right here, and still couldn't find his way out. Uzaya moved past the camp. The corridor curved and sloped downward before leveling out again. At last, he reached another staircase, much narrower than the last. He descended, the air growing colder with each step. The stairs ended at a junction, 3 passages. The left ended quickly in a collapsed mass of rubble and packed earth, the way completely blocked. The right sloped downward into stagnant water. Straight ahead, a warning sign was fixed to the floor. Spiral corruption confirmed. Do not proceed without sanctioned clearance. Uzaya went that way. The Veilguard stonework persisted, but human touches clung to it. Storage crates stacked against seamless black walls. Torch sconces wedged into gaps where black stone met ordinary stone. Wooden platforms bridging sections where the original floor had collapsed. He moved through the rooms methodically. It wasn't long before he found it. Double doors, taller than the others, set beneath an archway carved with administrative crucible seals. A bronze plaque was mounted at the apex, tarnished but still legible. Office of the Archmage Research Division. The doors hung ajar. The chamber contained a carved desk of dark wood, splintered down the middle, its drawers torn out and scattered. Broken bookshelves lay toppled across the floor, their contents long since rotted or removed. Uzaya found a nameplate amid the debris, its brass surface dulled by decades of dust. Archmage Corel Temrath, Research Division, Antiquities and Resonance. On the wall, certificates, awards, commendations, mounted high and sealed with the crucible's mark, all bearing the same name. Journals lay scattered across the workspace, most ruined, pages fused together. Uzaya sifted through them carefully, lifting what he could, separating what remained whole from what powdered between his fingers. One volume had survived. The binding held, barely, only a few pages intact. It lay open where it had fallen, the writing still legible. He read it. Activation successful. The surface responds to certain frequencies. I can see the patterns forming, geometric, precise, drawn. This is communication. There were no further entries. Everything here was destroyed, and Temrath's body was nowhere to be found. He moved beyond the office into the laboratory. Work tables overturned, retorts shattered, alembics cracked along their coils, glass crunching beneath his boots. But something much worse was here. Across every surface, walls, ceiling, floor, spiral cysts swelled, bulbous growths of dark, glass-sheened flesh, threaded with precise geometric seams, pulsing with low green radiance. They had not been placed there. They had pushed through the stone itself, fed by power that had nowhere left to go. He moved to the nearest table. Glassware lay broken in radiating patterns. Through each shard ran a vein of restless luminescence, tendrils threading the crystal, something inside them that writhed and swam. At the chamber's far end, stairs led down. This was where the last expedition had turned back. Uzaya did not. At the bottom of the stairs, he could sense it and smell it. The spiral corruption intensified. In the laboratory above, spiral cysts were spreading in patches, like lichen on stone. Nauseating green vapor curled into the air from wart-like abscesses and ruptured growths. Here, the walls themselves were threaded with thick, root-like growths, glowing with thin green luminescence. Fleshy bulbs swelled along those lines, spreading an odor of death and decay. The cysts expanded and contracted slowly, deliberate and rhythmic. He followed the corridor until it widened into a vault. Black walls and floor absorbed the light. The ceiling was ruptured. Growth had forced its way through. Lines cracked and pulled out of alignment. Veins of light traced those breaks, threading ancient design with something that no longer obeyed it. Display cases lined the walls, set with deliberate spacing beneath the geometry. Most were shattered or emptied. The air felt wrong here. Not in his lungs, but behind his eyes. An ache that urged retreat. Uzaya moved deeper into the vault. The acrid stench intensified with each step until the edges of his vision blurred. His hand went to the pendant. Relief and warmth spread through his chest. At the vault's far end, a hairline seam cut across the black stone where wall met floor. Dust had settled along its edge, tracing it. He knelt and pressed his palm to it. The pendant pulsed. The seam parted without sound, the stone withdrawing to reveal a narrow recess. Inside lay a dagger. A half-closed eye formed the pommel. The recess fitted precisely. The blade was black metal, leather-wrapped hilt, threaded with veins of cold blue light that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. Patterns traced along it, geometric, fractal, shifting, not etched, grown, as if the blade itself had chosen these designs during forging. He reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the hilt, cold coursed through his palm and up his arm. The pendant flared warm in answer. Recognition between them. Uzaya slid the dagger into his belt. The vault had two exits. One led back toward the way he'd come. The other opened in the floor, a tight winding stair dropping away into darkness, ringed by a low chain meant more as warning than protection. He went deeper. The air grew colder. Dawn was coming. Thylin would seal the door, with or without him. He pressed on anyway. The stair wound down and ended at the edge of a single chamber, half-domed and enclosed. The floor spread wide enough to move freely, while the ceiling rose only as high as it needed to. The walls curved inward as they climbed, shaping the space around what it had been built to contain. A mirror stood near the center, 3 men high. The surface rippled. Something moved within it. It was not his reflection. Chapter 15. The Echo. Before him rose the mirror, framed in black stone that rose from the floor as a twisted arch. A cool light filled the chamber, bleeding gently from it and softening the edges of everything around it. The surface rippled, the reflections wavering like images seen through water. He circled wide, hand rising defensively. Uzaya recognized it in the seamless curvature, the stone drawn and turned as one piece. Dark metal worked along its edges, Veilguard symbology etched into each angle. The surface shivered. Something stepped through. It emerged soundlessly. A figure Uzaya recognized. It was him, but not quite. Where his skin was pale, it held no color. Where his eyes held life, it held none. Where he drew breath, it did not. An echo, nothing more. The thing lunged towards him. Uzaya sidestepped. The creature shifted at the same instant, occupying the space he had just vacated. When he feinted left, it was already there. Changes in footwork gained him nothing. He drew the dagger from his belt. The thing hesitated where it stood. Uzaya felt the pendant warm as green threads burned into view, time slowing. Tendrils of green filaments extended outwards from the mirror, into the echo's spine, its limbs, its throat. Not guiding it, holding it together. The vision vanished. Uzaya struck. The dagger stabbed into the echo's shoulder, but the blade met no resistance. Uzaya stumbled, catching himself a moment later. Sound vanished as the dagger passed through, leaving a pressure that snapped inward through the chamber. It began to break apart. Its form tore loose from its outline, smearing and stretching as though two parts had been held together by tension alone. It continued toward him, but the distance never closed. The thing was already unraveling, pulled toward the mirror in long distortions, its presence slipping, as if the chamber could no longer agree it had ever been there. Uzaya moved toward the mirror and drove the dagger into its surface. The blade entered and slipped through, passing into a different plane. The surface shuddered. What had given it depth flattened abruptly. The shifting reflections lost separation. Cracks spread across the liquid plane. Gaps opened where it no longer held, widening until nothing remained to bridge them. The thing flickered. Its form stretched toward the retreating void, then lost cohesion, drawn back into the emptiness where the surface had been. A final distortion, and then nothing. Where the mirror had been, only the frame remained. Through it, he could see the far chamber wall. The silence eased. His breathing returned, uneven. He ascended to the sealed door as the sun rose. Thailand stood where she'd been, arms crossed. She'd waited there all night. She looked past him into the dark stairwell, as if expecting something to follow. When nothing did, she began to close the barriers. As the last door slid shut, she turned toward Uzaya, allowing time for the wards to reform. "What did you find?" "No body," Uzaya said, opening his pack. "But these might be of interest." He showed her the few vials he'd taken. "Probably worthless now, but the spiral cysts," he said. "The corruption is growing on everything. Don't go down there." Thailand considered his words. Uzaya drew the dagger. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. Then she moved closer, examining it without touching. The black metal, the half-closed eye, the way light seemed to fall into the blade rather than reflect. "Veilguard," she said, not a question. "Yes." Her hand hovered near the pommel, close enough to feel the cold radiating from it. But wisdom kept her from contact. "That must be from the 4th level," she said. "Guess they missed it." She was quiet for a moment, calculating. "Do you know what this is?" Her voice had changed, almost reverent. "A knife," he said. "It's called Null Tone." She spoke the name as one might speak of an ancient god. "I've seen it referenced in the Veilguard Chronicles. It's one of the few artifacts with supplemental annotations." Uzaya waited, rolling the dagger in his hand, watching violet light move through it. The Veilguard forged it to sever what shouldn't exist. Spiral cysts, possession anchors, reflection-born things, like what you saw. She met his eyes. "The name describes what happens when it strikes. All sound dies. Severance." He remembered the echo coming apart without sound. After the access wards reset, Thailand led him back to her office. "Welcome, Uzaya. Full Crucible access starts today." I'll have your pass ready by afternoon. Null tone is yours, she continued. Standard policy says recovered artifacts revert to the institution. In this case, I'll make an exception. He nodded and turned to leave. Uzaya, she said, there are other sites, sealed areas beneath the city. If you're interested in continued work, we'll talk. You have enough to worry about beneath you, he said. Uzaya turned and left the crucible behind. Thylin remained seated after he was gone, sitting at her desk, lost in thought. 2 Veilguard artifacts, both responsive to one man, dormant until now. A line she'd read the day before rose unbidden in her memory. The balance has already failed. The spiral is spreading, she whispered, and only one man stands in its way. She sat in silence, listening to nothing. Outside, the rain resumed, soft at first, then steady, washing down the crucible's stone and into the cracks that had been growing there for centuries.